Hey there, what's up, y'all? Starting a new little series, and it's going to be called Inauguration of Titles and Belts and Rant, I guess. Alright, so we're going to go through this again, and we're going to reiterate some things that we missed the last time we went through this, that we lightly touched on this. In this series, we're just going to drop just a tad bit of research on the inauguration or creation of titles and belts dealing with boxing, because we love boxing. So we're going to lightly touch on some of the alphabet belts, the California Mexican title, the world colored title, or the world or black or Negro title. Then we're going to rant a little bit, etc., etc. All right, y'all ready? Let's go.
Hit me, you.
As we all know, currently there are 4 major sanctioning bodies in professional boxing. The official rules and regulations of the WBA, which is the World Boxing Association, the WBC, the World Boxing Council, the IBF, the International Boxing Federation, and the WBO, the World Boxing Organization. Now, they all recognize the other 3 major sanctioning bodies to make them all 4 and complete. They all recognize each other's champions and rankings, and they all come together for unification rules when they unify titles to have undisputed champion. All right. So each of these organizations sanction and regulate champions and championship bouts. Okay. And they award, their little prize belts. And oh yeah, the ring does too. The ring is just as old, if not older than most of those major 4 organizations. But anyway, before all these crazy belts and alphabet belts, champions were first recognized by public acclamation. So a champion in the era, champion in that era was a fighter who had a notable win over another fighter who was publicly acclaimed or critically acclaimed or world-claimed, or even sometimes in certain cases self-proclaimed champion. Okay, so you were the champion if you was a man that beat the man, and you were either world or your town acclaimed it, self-proclaimed. That happened a lot as well too. And then after the victory, if you continue to win, more and more people will recognize you as the champ. So on and so forth. I mean, so come on, y'all. Just imagine it's 1778 and you win. Y'all having a little bare knuckle contest or boxing contest, and you win in your hometown. Then you win in the neighboring town. Then you win near the harbor, over the creek, under the river, next state, over and over, etc. Then people will eventually say you're the champ. Or, if you got real, nationalistic people that's ride or die, they'll say you're the champ after you beat everybody in the town. All right, you'll be deemed the baddest man in the land, or either they'll make sure that you supposed to fight the baddest man in the land, whatever land that is. And in special cases, this is back to the belt thing.
Sucker, look at you.
Retirements or disputed results. Somebody tampering with the results. Bogus decisions. Retirements or bogus decisions or disputed results could lead to a championship being split amongst 2 men for short periods of time. So a few times in history, for whatever reason, the town thought they do one, other town thought they do one, or one country thought they do one, or maybe a few of the judges were crooked. So since there was too much controversy or dispute, they would just say, all right, well, we have 2 champions temporarily, let's say, until one of you jokers lose. All right, and it's probably how the sanctioning bodies came about. NASAC and NBA and all them probably was like, yeah, this dude's the champion, we deemed him. But then Puerto Rico and England was like, nah, you know what I'm saying, our guy really beat y'all guy, and all this splitting off and all this craziness. All right, so let's take it back to 1887. 1887, world title. I would say prior to 1887, you had the Queensberry rules and other rules that came before that it was built off of. It was like we were just saying, world acclamation or public acclaim or self proclamation that you were the champion. And then shortly after 1887, or right around it, the NBA came about, which is the National Boxing Association. I can't remember the exact date, but it's the late 1800s, early 1900s, the NBA. All right. And the NBA was the crown ruler for the universal champion up until the 1920s. All right. Now I can't remember exactly what happened in the 1920s, but as I'm peeking through the notes, it'll come later on in the video. All right. So bam, we got the world acclamation. Then we have the NBA, National Boxing Association. Then between 1961 and 1962, the NBA changed its name and merged and then became the WBA. Hence, the WBA is one of the oldest lineages for boxing titles. The WBA, World Boxing Association. Okay? And in 1975, the base for the WBA was decided to be in Panama. Okay? Then in the 90s, it moved around the island, some other places, but then it came right back to Panama in the late 90s. And I'm telling you where the home base is because all these organizations have home bases, sort of like an embassy or consulate where they have meetings and I guess, you know, smoke, drink, and talk trash about what belt and who money and stuff like that. Okay, now 1961 we got the NBA changing to become the WBA. Then in 1963 you have the NASAC, the EBU, the British Boxing Board of Control, and a few other countries with formidable belts, or I should say gangs, really. I should just call them gangs. And they formed the WBC. So the NASAC, in this 1963, NASAC, EBU, British Boxing Board of Control, a few other countries with their little gang belts or whatever, they formed the rival of the WBA, which is the WBC. So the WBC is formed in 63, 2 years after the NBA became the WBA.
I'm so good.
Now the WBC, the World Boxing Council, which was based in Mexico, olale, arriba.
Suck a look at you.
But this in turn created a very high number of disputed champions. Not undisputed, because we know undisputed means that there's no question that you're the champion. You done beat everybody down, whooped everybody head. When the WBC came along, this heightened the level of disputed champions, meaning he a champ, but I don't really think he's a world champ. It's questionable if he's a champ. So this increased after the WBC came along and on into the 70s and so on and so forth, because both bodies, the WBA and the WBC, had separate official rankings and they had separate champions. But they did make sure that their champions were meant to face each other and top-ranked opponents were meant to face each other. Or if they didn't, they were forced to either forfeit their titles or a tournament was held. Now, this is still the 60s and 70s, so they still had somewhat of integrity of having an undisputed champion, making the best fight the best.
Back to the gym, son.
And some of the best fights in history, as it's stating here, were between WBA and WBC champions to create the once again world acclaimed title of undisputed champion. And this was during the 60s and 70s, y'all. Okay? So, bam, here we go. Here's what happened in the 1920s. The NASAC, the New York State Athletic Commission, was founded in 1920. So we had the World Acclamation, then we had the NBA, and right around the same time of the NBA in the 1920s was the NASAC. Okay? And also, yeah, that's right, before we forget, the Ring Magazine began awarding world championships in the 1920s as well. 1922 to be exact. So in the 20s, we had the Ring belt, the NASAC, and the NBA belts. But how can I say this? It was more so the Ring was like a vote, like a plurality vote, such as a presidency. That was like okay, everybody votes this person, we think he the best, so we're going to put him up as the champ, put him in the magazine, blah, blah, blah. But the actual tangible title was really awarded by the NBA during the 20s. So if you had the NBA title, you were usually looked upon as the man, the undisputed champ. All right. Now back to WBC. Here's a side note: the NABF, which is a non-profit regional sanctioning body up under the WBC, is one of these, alphabet belts, and there's tons of these. How can I say, derivative type groups up under the sanctioning bodies? You got the NABF that's up under the WBC. You got the OPBF, which is also up under the WBC. But anyway, the NABF came about up out of the WBC in 1969. The OPBF was another alphabet title that was, I think, created for Asia. I'm not sure, but that's going to be in other videos. So I don't understand why these big belt gangs just don't maintain one belt. We got the WBC, the main title. Why do we need a silver? Why do we need an NABF? Why do we need a little brother belt for certain regions? You see what I'm saying? Because back in the day, when we're going to get a little to this in the video, the champs of a region came and sought out the so-called acclaimed champs. They came from Puerto Rico, Cuba, England, Australia, all over. Or either like cats like Baby Arismendi and Teo Cruz, they went there. If you was the champ in America and you got word that some dude out in Australia, New Zealand was calling himself the champ, you flew or rode a boat over there to go whoop him down to see who really the man was, to go see who really had the machismo, to see who really was the damn champ. That's how you shut folks up, and that's how you make it where there's not all these damn belts. But anyway, so again, the NASAT was formed in 1920. The WBC was formed in 1963. And a little before that, after the NASAC, NBA in the ring in the 20s, and before the WBC, in 1946, the IBU was formed, okay? The International Boxing Union. But the IBU soon became the EBU, which is the European Boxing Union. But like many other groups, the EBU merged into and became a part of the WBC in 1963 as well. Then, in 1976, there was another body founded, and it was called the USBA. The USBA then became what we now know as the IBF, the International Boxing Federation, which the IBF finally got its credibility and accreditation, and it was finally inaugurated and recognized in 1983. All right, they had so much juice that they were put on the level of a WBA and a WBC. So before the IBF, it was the WBA and the WBC. These are the two crowns. So back then, in the 60s and most of the 70s and the early 80s, all you needed was the WBA and the WBC to be the undisputed champion. Then 83, IBF finally got up enough juice, enough money, enough whatever they was doing, enough trash talking, enough under the table deals, and they were sanctioned as a championship high level governing body. And that happened in 83. So after 83, you needed to have 3 major boxing head belts, groups, gangs, stuff at one time to be undisputed champion. So after 83, let's say 1984, whoever was fighting then, Spinks or whoever, you had to have the WBA, WBC, and IBF, and in that order of age, because the WBA is the oldest. All right.
Hey, you out, sucker.
For example, after some negotiations, the heavyweight title was unified in coordinated bouts in 1985, 1986, 1987. And Mike Tyson was the first undisputed champion to hold all the 3 combined belts, the WBC, the WBA, and the IBF, since Leon Spinks first did it in 1978. So that means in 1978, Leon Spinks was the first, let's say, so-called undisputed champion, because the IBF wasn't fully inaugurated. It came about in 76, but it wasn't fully inaugurated until 83. So they're saying that even though Mike Tyson was the second to have all 3 belts, he was the first fully inaugurated, truly recognized undisputed champ. And I can't remember, y'all, if it was 86 or 87. Okay, and I'm glad they was making bouts to make sure that there was an undisputed champion or having tournaments. We got to bring this attitude back. And we fighting to unify titles, man. Which is so.
You ain't nothing.
1988. Here we go with an extra belt. All right, in 88, y'all remember the Seoul Olympics. I think the 88 Olympics was in Seoul. The WBO comes along. Here we go. The World Boxing Organization. And this, to this day, is the newest belt or the newest sanctioning boxing belt gang body. The WBO is the newest one, and it came about in 1988. Okay? Now, it was established in Puerto Rico back in 88. Now, this one took longer to acquire credibility. By the year, it was established and inaugurated in 88, but they really didn't acquire a credibility, and their belt wasn't sought after until the year 2000. All right? Up until the year 2000, 2001, the WBA was only giving recognitions to the WBC and IBF, like as in recognizing their champions and ranking their champions along with their champions on their top list, on their the rankings list. It wasn't until 2001, that the WBA started recognizing WBO champions, and they started ranking the WBO along with the WBC and IBF as champions in their rankings and champions with who have a worthy belt. So we know the game. Either somebody was paid off, somebody palm got greased finally, somebody was extorted or coerced, or made some sort of slick investment. Y'all know the drill. Then in 2004, the WBC began naming the WBO champions on its rankings list as well. So first the WBA did it in 2001. Then the second oldest boxing belt governing body, the WBC, began doing it as early as 2000, or excuse me, or as late as 2004. So WBO champions, not only are they the youngest, sanctioning belt gang body, but they really didn't get their respect until recently. You know what I'm saying? So I guess Cassius got the WBO, like who has the WBO? The Adonis Stevenson, and tons of cats had it. Pacquiao had it, or just had it, and Floyd vacated it. But anyway, the WBO is new in the game, and they finally got their respect as of about 10 years ago. And to add on to that, check this out. The WBA and the WBC was recognizing the WBO in the early 2000s, but the IBF didn't recognize the WBO until February of 2007. So obviously the WBO, again, like we say, they the youngest, like the baby brother, the pecking order's been designed. I mean, you're going to protect him, you're going to look out for him, but everybody's going to whoop his head, everybody's going to take his candy. Nobody cares if he cries. Everybody's going to be throwing him around, throwing him through walls and stuff. But, he's the baby. I mean, he really had to come up through the ranks, and usually those babies are pretty tough. Or either they're well protected.
Sucker, you ain't nothing.
So the WBO tried to get in, you got to pay to play, man. They probably got in, did a little deals, got their little money up. And, of course, you probably got to kiss a little behind and say and recognize whoever you can so you can come up. But, all right, that's enough ranting for now. Again, just in conclusion, world acclamation, NBA, NASAC, then the NBA becomes the WBA, but before that, in 46, you had the IBU, but the WBA was the big head at the time, the WBA. Then the IBU becomes the EBU, and then they form together with a few other small corporations and become the WBC. So then after WBC, we get the IBF in the 80s. Oh, no, excuse me. The IBF, the late 70s. Well, y'all go back and listen. And then lastly but not least, we got the WBO in the late 80s out of Puerto Rico. Ho! And then they finally get recognition, big recognition to the 2000s. And now we're at the weak state that we're at today. But stay tuned for part 2. Pardon me for rambling. That's all, folks.